Well, it is good to be back with you folks again. I've been looking forward to this moment, as I know that you, especially those of you on the search committee, I know have been looking forward to this moment because it's often a long process to get to this point where we are at today. But this is a day of celebration. It's a day of new beginnings. I want to commend the search committee because I think you folks went through this process in a very deliberate and very intentional way. I'd never sensed that you were trying to hurry it along. Sometimes I think, as I said to the search committee early on in the process, that churches want to just get back to what they had before, which is having an installed pastor for their congregation. But I think that there's some important work that happens with the congregation when you are going through that transition period. And I know that Pastor James, when he was with you, he is one of the best people that we have in the central region for helping churches kind of navigate through that transition period. And so he is now, you folks probably know, he's now in Harrington, Kansas. We convinced him to go to one of our other churches that's in the midst of their transition period. And so he and Linda, she's the best hugger in the region. I think I'm not telling you folks anything new, but whenever I see Linda, I get at least 2 or 3 hugs from her, and you folks probably experience the same thing. I will admit to you that I'm never a fan of the language that we use on days like today when we talk about installing a new pastor, because it always feels to me a little bit like we're putting a new appliance in the church kitchen, you know. So let's install something new, you know, and let's, you know, throw the other one in the dumpster kind of thing. And I know that that's not what we're saying here, but I'd like to suggest to you that we use a little bit different language other than the language of installation. But installing a pastor is what we're familiar with. You know what I say when I say that, but I'm going to suggest to you we use a little bit different language. Now, but for a moment, I want you to think about that idea of installing a new appliance. You know, when you install a new appliance, most of us go to the store and we look at what's available. I don't think that any of us ever says, okay, I want the oldest thing that you got in the store. I want the technology from 30 years ago to put in, and I may want the durability of appliances that we had from 30 years ago, but I want the latest, and I want the greatest, and I want the best that you have to offer, and I want it the cheapest too. So don't forget the cheapest in all of this. And so that's kind of the idea, at least when I go to install a new appliance or get a new appliance. Those are some of the thoughts that come through my mind. And in many ways, if we apply that to Mike's new beginning here, it wouldn't be fair to him to have that kind of expectation. Now, he may be the latest and the greatest and the best model that is on the market today. He could be all of those things, but I don't think that we want to lay that kind of expectation on him. And in the same way, when Mike came from North Dakota, I don't think that he is in any way upgrading to this congregation from what he had in Fargo. Now, I really don't know much about the congregation in Fargo, but I don't think he said, yeah, I need an upgrade here, so I'm going to move to Kansas. Now, he is, I think, upgrading when it comes to weather. And that is going to be a real challenge for Mike as he navigates what life was like in Fargo, North Dakota, from what life is in Hiawatha, Kansas. I don't know if you follow social media, but shortly after he arrived here, he posted one day, he said, I think it was one of those 100-degree days, and he put, I think he was commenting on a weather report. It said, extreme heat warning. He says, I wonder what that is. So you're going to have to help him navigate, you know, when it gets to September and October and November and December and January, and there's not 2.5 feet of snow on the ground, and he's just feeling a little bit like he doesn't know how to operate in that kind of an environment. So the idea of installation, I think, is one that we could do better. And the word that I would suggest to you rather than installation is recalibrate. Because I think more importantly, this is one of those moments in time when we should be recalibrating. Now, when you recalibrate something, you are resetting whatever it is that you're recalibrating to a fixed standard. So there is some parameter that whatever it is you're recalibrating needs to operate in to operate most effectively. And so if you get it within that range, then you've recalibrated it. And so I really think what's going on here in a day like today is that we are recalibrating both. Mike is recalibrating to life in Hiawatha, and the fixed standard is what life is like here. But he's also, in a sense, recalibrating himself against who God is and how God has called him to be a pastor in a completely new context. And you folks are recalibrating yourselves too, because Mike is a different person than Pastor James. Mike is different than what you've experienced in the past, Pastor Blake. And so you're having to recalibrate yourselves and learn a new person that is now going to minister and serve alongside you here in Hiawatha. So this idea of recalibration, I think, is a much healthier way to think about a moment like we are in. A few moments ago, David read for you Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 16. And I want to read verse 15 for you one more time. But speaking the truth in love, we must grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ. The church in Ephesus was most likely not a single congregation, but was a collection of a bunch of very small churches that were in that general vicinity of Ephesus. Now, there were probably house churches. And so there was a small house church here and a small house church there. And somehow together they made up what was known as the Ephesus church. And so when Paul was writing his letter to this group of Christians, he was writing this as a letter to be shared among all these different house churches. And all of these little house churches were different in some way too. There were some that were a little bit more Jewish, and some that were more Gentile, and some that were everything in between. And for those Jewish Christians, they wanted their newfound Christianity to really reflect and look like a part of their Jewish upbringing that they were coming from. It was familiar to them. We all like what we like, and because it's quite often familiar to us. And then there were the Gentile Christians that were completely new to things of faith. And so they were all over the map in terms of ethics and morality. And so they were not quite sure what should be the standard. They knew that they were following this person of Jesus who had been killed and raised again from the dead. And they were trying to make sense of all of that. And so we had the Jewish Christians on one hand and the Gentile Christians on the other hand, and people all along the continuum in between, that they were trying to figure out, what does it mean for us to be a follower of Jesus? And to those people, Paul was saying, you must grow up in every way into the head who is Christ. Another challenge for the Ephesian Christians was that they were susceptible to gimmicks and schemes that might come along. Someone would come along with an idea and it seemed good, and they say, well, yeah, let's try that for a while. And so they'd head off in that direction. And someone else would come up with another idea, and so they would head off in that direction. And so they were very susceptible to all of that. And so Paul was trying to encourage them to make sure that they were calibrated to the person of Christ. Now, like most churches in the central region, this is not a new congregation. You've been around for a while. You have a history to draw upon. And even though Mike is toward the younger end of the age spectrum, he's also been around for a while too. He has pastored before, so he has some experiences to draw from. And so it may seem a little bit odd that we are focusing on a phrase from Ephesians chapter 4 where it says you must grow up in every way, because we don't think about those who have been around for a while or have experience as needing to grow up unless they're incredibly immature. And I don't think that's the case with you folks in Hiawatha. And I have known Mike for probably 10 years, and so I don't think that's the case with him either. But this challenge that Paul lays out for us is one, I think, no matter where we are at in terms of age or experience or in terms of spiritual maturity, we can always learn something new about what it means to grow up in every way into the head who is Christ. My very first pastorate was in North Carolina. And I served a small little church outside of Hillsborough, North Carolina. And the organist of that congregation was a dear, sweet lady by the name of Rebecca Crawford. And Rebecca, she was a single person. She had never been married before. And she was very determined in what she was doing. And her mind was always going much faster than every other part of her life. And so a typical experience in talking with Rebecca on the phone is that she would call you up and you would answer the phone, and then you wouldn't have to say another word because it was basically a monologue. She would talk through, and she was just kind of an out-here processor. And so everything that she had to say, she would say in that phone conversation. And then when she was done, even if she asked the question, she didn't wait long enough for you to give an answer to her. She would just say goodbye and she would hang up. And so you kind of were a little puzzled by the whole conversation. But she was never offended by that, and sometimes she might call you back a little bit later and follow up and build upon that conversation. Well, one day, Rebecca called me up and she said, "Gregg, you need to get over here right away. I can't find Peter and we need to get him back." And I did not know Rebecca very well, and so I was immediately alarmed. Who is Peter? Is Peter her husband, and is he, lost in the woods? Or is Peter someone in her family that, has some mental stability problems? And so I was starting to unpack all of my pastoral care tools that I had newly acquired from going to seminary. And so I was getting excited about, boy, I can really step in and be a pastor in this moment. So I drove over to Rebecca's, and she was waiting for me out in the yard. And I quickly learned that Peter was her mule, and he had gotten out of the pasture, and she just needed someone to help get the mule back in the pasture. And so initially there was a certain amount of disappointment in that. And I learned very quickly in that moment that ministry happens in the ordinary moments of life. They happen when you're trying to figure out where the mule is and get the mule back in the pasture. Now, are there any mules in Hiawatha, Kansas that any of you have? Okay, so there are a few. So if they get out, Mike, you may have an opportunity to act pastorally in helping get that mule back in the pasture. But there's going to be a whole host of other ordinary moments that you will find yourself in where you might have a chance to minister to these people here, and where you folks have a chance to invite Mike into the growing up in every way process that happens in life. Don't dismiss those ordinary moments that you find yourself in, because I think that those are often the most effective and most powerful ministry moments that we can have. There's a word that Paul uses in this passage where he talks about growing up in every way into the head who is Christ. And that word is kephale. In Greek, it's the word for head, and the word actually means source. It means where something originates from. Young or old, you folks are here, and you have a chance to grow up in every way. But the way that Paul uses this word kephale in this passage, when he talks about Christ who is the head, is that he uses it to describe that Jesus is not only the destination, but He's also the process by which we get to the destination. So it's kind of that weird mix of He is where we are going, and He is also how we get there. That's the idea that we have in this sense. Christ is where we're going, but also how we get there. How many of you have a porch on your house? Okay, fair number of you have porches. We're all familiar with what a porch is. I want you to imagine for a moment a porch on a very stately, wonderful house right here in Hiawatha. And maybe it's even a porch that has two levels, like a main level porch and then a second level porch too. And there's a pathway that goes by this house. And there are people that are on the pathway, and there are also people on the porch, either on the second level or on the base level. I want you to imagine further that this congregation is the group of people that's either on the pathway or up on the porch, first level, second level. Now, I love porches. That's one of the things I loved about living in the South, is that those in the southern part of the United States, I think, do porches very well. Part of it, I think, is climate. But I love porches. I love the imagery of porches. I love what happens on porches. So in this mental image that I've asked you to conjure up in your mind and place yourself in, some of you are probably up on the second level of the porch because there's a great vantage point that you can see. Some of you might be down on the lower level of the porch because you just don't like to do stairs. Some of you might be on the pathway that goes by this particular house. As you imagine all of you in this scene somewhere, imagine that some of you who are on the pathway are inviting those who are up on the porches to come and join them. And when you hear the invitation and you hear how it's described what life is like on the pathway, you say, yeah, let's get off the porch. Let's go down on the path. Because they're describing, here's what it looks like up around the corner. Maybe it's in the fall of the year and the leaves are wonderfully beautiful. This is the city of, what is it, City of Maples? Or you have some kind of big leaf festival? Is that where you get together and like rake everyone's yards or what? No, that's not what happens? Okay. Well, I'll have to learn what the City of Maples or the Leaf Festival is all about. But imagine, for the sake of this, that it's during that time and there's just wonderful colors. And so some get off the porch and they go and start walking with those on the path. And some say, yeah, I don't think so. I'm just going to stay here up on the porch and watch. What can you do up on a porch? Well, you can see a lot of things. But there's also a lot of things that you cannot do while you're on the porch. The view stays pretty much the same unless the seasons are changing. And it's not like you can really get anywhere by staying on the porch. You're just kind of on the porch. I think that this moment that we find ourselves in, that there are some of you, as in this new beginning of ministry, are on the porch and you maybe are stepping back and watching what's going on. And you're just going to observe for a while. That's okay. That's a great vantage point. But I think eventually on the porch, we need to get down and be on the journey. Because that is how we grow. And that is how we grow in every way. When Paul says that we must grow up into Him who is the head, into Christ, he's talking about this faith journey. We change constantly in life. From the day we are born until the day that we are die, it is a process of changing. And I think the same thing holds true in our spiritual growth. From the day we make that first decision to say, yes, I am a Jesus follower, until the last day when we are on the face of this earth, it's an opportunity for us to grow. It's okay to be a porch sitter or stander. But at some point, I think we need to be on the pathway, walking together, helping those along who might stumble, and encouraging those who may get a little tired, and just really blessing those and sharing with those who are on the journey with us about what we're seeing along the way, because we all miss things as we're walking along. So whether you're on the porch or on the path, be with those who are around you. Be with those walkers if you're a porch person. Be with those porch people if you are a walker, and everything in between, because I think that's what we mean, that's what we learn, that's what we discover when we grow up into Christ, who is the head.